Hello, all you weirdos. Jim here, and if you listened to our review of Action Comics number 1060 last month, you already know that I wasn't a huge fan of Joe Casey's Kneel Before Zod prelude story. It wasn't horrible. It just didn't have any sort of hook for me. Now, I like Zod. I like him enough as a Superman villain, but I'm not sure that I need 12 issues of him hanging out on what he's now calling New Kandor, most likely talking shit on everyone not called Drew or Zod. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not writing this series off yet. I hate when people write things off before they give it a shot. And really, we don't have enough good books coming out right now for me to just write things off willy-nilly like that. So I'm pushing that poor first impression aside. We'll unpack that later, right? And I'm hoping to be wowed by this first issue so that I can be fully on board with a 12-issue maxi series with Zod. Now, was that the case? Was I impressed? Are my hopes up? Well, let's find out.
You are all weirdos.
Weird science is the revolution. Weird science is the revolution.
Kneel Before Zod, number 1 is written by Joe Casey with art by Dan McDade, colors by David Barone, and letters by Troy Petiri. This issue does pick up right from the Action Comics backup, so if you like that more than I did, I think you'll immediately like this more than I did. Like the backup, there's nothing really wrong with Joe Casey's script. It just doesn't have any sort of spark for me. It doesn't feel like it has that exciting thing going on overall. We still have a lot of issues, but for this deal, and this being like my second version of a first impression, I still get that feeling that I need some sort of hook. We start with Zod being haunted by the ghost of Jor-El past. It establishes a couple things. Zod's past fate, his hate of the House of El, and then he might be a little Looney Tunes here, right? Something that the Eradicator is a little concerned with as we go forward, but that actually might be the most interesting scene in the entire issue, and it's very brief. Because after that, it feels like Joe Casey is more intent on setting up things. And I think every first issue is going to set up things. But this is setting up things for other books as well than actually just telling an exciting story in this one that makes me want to keep reading. So this week, a couple of people asked me if this book was in continuity and if I thought it'd be important by the time it was finished. And really, I can't tell anybody just yet if it's going to be important by the end, but I can tell you that it is in continuity, which is always cool. It makes things, at least at that point, feel a little more important. The problem is you spend more than half an issue just to kick Zod's son Lore out of the book because he's going to be in Peter J. Tomasi's Sinister Son series. You take way too long to do this, and in my mind, it would have been better served to get more of a background of Lore than just this idea of Zod and his son fighting. Now, it's page after page of Lore questioning his father and Zod expressing his disappointment in his firstborn son, sometimes with a sharp backhand as an exclamation point. You see, he gets a little handsy, but hey, New Kandor is Zod's place to be. He makes up the rules. It feels redundant almost immediately, and by the end, I don't think anyone reading it is going to like either character here, which does kind of work a bit for Zod because it is just Zod being Zod in his own book, but it doesn't make me want to follow Lore Zod off to the Sinister Sons book at all. He never, to me, has ever really felt that interesting. And then here he just kind of feels like he's a whiny brat that gets kicked out of the planet by his dad, and I don't really care. And that's a weird play. You would think that Joe Casey would take a little bit more care to have Lore go off and like, oh my God, I got to see what happens with him. By the time he leaves, it almost feels like just a plot prop, or even the idea that it kind of gets just shoved aside and we just move on. Because after Lore rockets off to eventually hook up with Sinestro's son, we find out that all of this was part of an ancient hazing ritual of the House of Zod. This is what they do. the firstborn son is always kicked out into the stars to make their way on their own, which kind of explains why, they're all miserable bastards. That's the play. I mean, that's what you get. You get some hardened characters here. You get maybe some, people who could be militaristic leaders, but you don't really get nice people a la Zod. And hopefully I think that what you'll get in Peter J. Tomasi's Sinister Sons is seeing that Lord Zod isn't quite like his father. Even though in this play, he's yelling that pretty much figuring out that Zod has made his own Death Star type deal, a star killer, and he wants him to use it right away. So he kind of comes off a little abrasive himself already. But we then move on. Lord Zod leaves, and it's like, all right, sayonara, sucker. What else do we have going on here? And you do end up having Zod's wife, Ursa. She's pregnant. This all goes with a prophecy. That's one of the mysteries going on. But also, we get a bit more continuity because here we see the bottled city of Kandor. And when we see that, we learn that that's a key piece in Zod's plan to populate New Kandor, thus the name. At one point, you did have the planet, which is just Jakul, being named New Krypton, but now it's New Kandor. It ties in with the bottled city of Kandor. And I was actually shocked that there wasn't much of a background on how Zod got the bottled city of Kandor. I mean, that's a big thing. And I think that a lot of people will end up reading this and be like, what'd you say? How did he get that? Like, where's Superman and why does he have the bottled city of Kandor? And there is a continuity background to this, unfortunately, starting with Brian Michael Bendis, right? Brian Michael Bendis ended up destroying the bottled city of Kandor for some cheap feels, but it was later brought back by Joshua Williamson in Batman Superman number 8 in March of 2020. So about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, he ends up bringing it back. And in that issue, Zod snuck off with the bottled city and half of its occupants, half of the Kandorians. The thing was, the other half were put in a Lazarus pit to bring them back to life, and they were a little bit crazed. So what happened was Zod grabbed the bottled city, kind of tricked Batman and Superman, and took off with half of the Kandorians, and that seems to be picked up right here pretty well. Again, a lot of people won't get the connection, but it is Zod trying to bring the Kandorians back. Then we'll work the whole play of, making them bigger, things like that. And it's kind of a cool play, but it also gives you that idea, like, what has Superman been doing? He knows, and they knew that this whole sneak away deal, Batman and Superman were well aware of what happened. I guess you can say that Superman was busy doing War World stuff, so he couldn't go and save the Kandorians. But really, what was he doing for years and decades for the bottled city of Kandor? It just kind of sat there. He'd always say, I'll get to that later. Like, hey, Kandorians. And then make it worse, when he really needed some answers and some science, he'd shrink himself down and then go in to confer with the scientist in Kandor. And I swear, every time as he's leaving, they're yelling, Superman, when are you going to make us bigger again? And he pretends he can't hear. The guy who has, super hearing can't hear the please, make us bigger. Please do something. But he's always too busy to help. And that is once again. Now, the rest of the issue here involves a pretty uninteresting fight with some Kun pirates. They end up attacking New Kandor. Zod goes off and fights them off with his Eradicator robots, but it's more Zod pretty much showing that he's badass. He takes down these Kun pirates, and they seem to not really understand what they were getting into. They had been tipped off that New Kandor was ripe for the picking, right? And I do think that the United Planets, they are the ones who pretty much probably whispered in these pirates or funded them straight up, because the United Planets gets involved. We saw this in that prelude. They want Zod to, fall in line, join in with the United Planets, and Zod doesn't want any parts of that. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, you do have him making weapons of mass destruction. The big play, though, was that Lord Zod, his son, wanted, hey, let's fire this crap off right now, and said, no, we'll wait. But he does have those weapons. It's, the play of him trying to hide it from the United Planets, so they're going to butt heads throughout. But again, I don't know that that's something that really interests me. You know what I mean? But again, I think that they're going to find out, or Zod's going to find out, that this whole Kund attack was orchestrated or set up by the United Planets, which will cause more friction there. So overall, though, this issue is pretty mid. I didn't hate it again. It's one of those weird plays. I'm still kind of sitting here waiting for something to grab me. Or, I mean, in a worse way, waiting for something to be so bad that I say, okay, I don't need to read this. But I don't get either of that here. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I'm just kind of in the middle. And instead of being excited for the next issue, I'm actually sitting here trying to come up with reasons to even read more of this. And the only thing I can come up with besides reviewing it here is that I got to wait until I, either hate it and drop it, or at least start liking it a bit so that I look forward to the next issue, even a smidgen. Now, one of the biggest problems I had here, Dan McDade's art, it's just kind of bland. It doesn't do anything to help elevate the story in my mind and actually makes a bland issue more bland. So in the end, with all that wrapped up and all that craziness, I'm going to give Neil Before Zod #1 a very disappointing 6 out of 10. And I think I'm being a bit positive because it's a first issue. But I'm going to be that positive because, again, I didn't hate it yet. But I didn't love it. So 6 out of 10. And I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks of it in the comments below. And again, if you like the issue more than me, that's no reason to fight. That's no reason, to do crazy things, whatever. I'd love to hear why you like it, or if you don't like it as much as I did. Same deal. I always like to hear why people like things because sometimes that sheds some light on things that I didn't see. That maybe it is something that I can be like, oh my God, they're right. This could be kind of cool and whatnot. So I'd love to hear from people. Please comment down below. And as always, check the description of this video for links to everything Weird Science, including our websites, podcasts for DC Comics, Marvel Comics, manga, and more. And if you would like to help us out and get a ton of exclusive podcasts in return, and I mean a ton, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Weird Science. And I know at points people always talk about this whole play, but you can go right now and get a 7-day free trial. So you can see what I mean by we have a ton of shows, and then decide after that 7 days if it's right for you, if you actually want to pay and put down your hard-earned money, because I know times are tight and tough for a lot of people. So check that out for 7 days. No fuss, no muss, and then decide. So thanks all you weirdos. And with all that, I will talk to you all later.
You are all weirdos.
Weird science is the revolution. Weird science is the revolution.